The biggest message that people should understand is you cannot reason with your senses. You cannot reason with them. You cannot control them.
Hey squirrels, welcome to AvyHD, where ADHD isn't some clinical diagnosis, it's just life. I'm Avy, your always honest tour guide through this beautiful mess. Over here, we're not about fixing yourself. We're about figuring out how to actually enjoy your life as you are. So grab a snack and let's go. You got diagnosed, maybe you got medicated, maybe you hired a coach, maybe you built a system, you read every book, you joined every community, and some of it helped, some of it didn't. There's this one thing that nobody has really been able to explain. Why, even when you do everything right, there are days where your brain just will not cooperate. What if, and I need you to stay with me here, what if there's a layer that nobody ever checked? Not a character flaw, not a failure of willpower, but literally a neurological processing issue. One that is measurable, one that has solutions, one that for a lot of people changes everything. Today, we're pulling back a layer that the diagnostic world has been stepping over for decades. Hey squirrels, welcome back to AvyHD. Let's get into it. I am joined today by Jacki Edry. Jacki is an author, speaker, and neurodiversity advocate with more than 35 years in the field. She's the author of Moving Forward, Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery, and Faith. And she was recognized as one of the top 50 global neurodiversity evangelists in 2023. But here's what makes Jacki different from almost everyone else talking about neurodiversity right now. In 2013, she was diagnosed with a large brainstem tumor, and the surgery scrambled her senses. She had to relearn basic motor functions. And in the process of recovering, she experienced firsthand what it actually feels like to have a brain that processes the world differently. Not as a professional studying it from the outside, but as a person living it from the inside. And that experience became a book, a body of work, and a very specific and urgent message that I think a lot of our squirrels have never heard before. Jacki, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
You've spent over 35 years in the neurodiversity space, but something happened in 2013 that changed the way that you approached the work that you had done before that. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, actually, the thing that was, I guess, most comforting about what happened to me and actually living the I was always a nonlinear thinker, a little bit of a different brain, but I wasn't diagnosed with anything, although I don't know if they diagnosed back then. It was quite a long time ago. As much as they do now, there wasn't that kind of, because I excelled in school, it wasn't something that people were looking for issues, although I knew that I was not like everybody else, and I preferred learning in different learning situations. After that, I started working with an autistic child when I was in high school, and then I worked in college with autistic kids in summer camps. And then a number of years after that, my children were born, and my oldest son, I realized very young that he was autistic, so I had an autistic. And in addition, when I was in college, a number of years previous, I forgot to mention that my thesis was on educational programs for autistic children. And so I was a parent, a caretaker, and a professional. And I was observing all the time things that were going on and the behaviors of your children that I was working with. And I was relieved that I was always very respectful of them and what they were. And I tried to figure out what was going on with them. And I was never an advocate for the ABA type treatments or deciding for them who they were and what they were supposed to do or eliminating stimming or any of those sort of things. So my relief, I guess, was that I didn't go down that route. And when I woke up with a neurodivergent brain, I realized what it felt like. And I was like, oh, thank God I never went down that brain. And how difficult things really are trying to manage living with different neurological processing and sensory processing, and how much it can scramble up your entire environment and the things you need to do to improve quality of life and feel comfortable and perform in ways that you're satisfied with yourself and form relationships with people. So I guess there was a lot of relief that I was, understanding that from a distance, but understanding it firsthand gave me lots of insights and that's why I went down the route of writing a book and blogging and speaking and doing what I'm doing now, to try and share those insights with other people, to help improve the quality of lives. I mean, understand the kids better, that the kids are not necessarily being defiant, rather their brains are processing things differently.
Absolutely. When you talk about the scramble, what did that actually feel like day to day?
There are no words to really describe what that feels like, because they're certainly different levels. And if your sensory processing is off, then the two areas where my sensory processing was most affected were my visual field and my hearing, my auditory processing. All of my senses that can be hypersensitive or hyposensitive or scrambled. Two are the most dominant senses. As a general rule, visual processing is 70% of your sensory processing, so that's our most dominant sense. So when my visual field was off, my whole world was unstable. First of all, it knocks out your vestibular system works on auditory and visual processing. It's your auditory nerve. Your vestibular nerve is part of your auditory system, and how that communicates with your eyes. So if my visual processing is off, that communication line was affected, and therefore my vestibular processing was also off. So I had severe balancing issues, and my whole world was crazy. I would look at somebody and their face would melt or split. I would sit on, look at the lights on the ceiling, and they'd start dancing across the ceiling. The staircases would look like the Hitchcock movie, where they would be spinning around like a vertigo. I could walk down the road and the sidewalk would raise up suddenly. Really nutty things. I had a very difficult time leaving the house. Everything was completely exhausting. And you really, lose your sense of, my depth perception was up. I didn't know where I was in space. I didn't know how far things were away from each other. And that was a very, very severe handicap, which I experienced for 4 years. And then I discovered Irlen spectral filters, which is what you see. These are not sunglasses. These are custom tinted lenses. You can find out more about them on irlen.com. Also, if you think you have visual issues, you can do a self-test questionnaire and see if it's applicable if you want to check it further. So my issues were very severe, and no one could figure out what was going on. I was to ophthalmologists. I went to neuro-ophthalmologists. I tried everything, and everybody just said, no, we don't see anything wrong with you. But I was severely impaired. And terrible light sensitivity. So flashing lights or anything like that could throw me up. I couldn't go into a school performance. I couldn't go into a shopping mall. I couldn't go into a supermarket. And certainly not a wedding or things like that. And the same sort of thing was going on in my auditory field. So I had both of them. And so that was really whacked me out. The minute I put on my Irlen spectral filters, though, that stabilized my visual field immediately. So suddenly I could walk a straight line, and I didn't, get dizzy. And
what you're describing, there's kind of two pictures in my head. I first is Humpty Dumpty. I'm just thinking about poor Humpty Dumpty falling off a wall, and then everything from the inside is just all on the outside, and he has to kind of figure it out. And then the other thought that I was thinking is, when society or when normal people look at someone and they say that person is crazy because they're doing something a little weird, because they're walking a little weird, because they're talking to someone who maybe isn't there, because they're what you're describing is, you must feel crazy.
I didn't feel crazy, although sometimes maybe people thought I was crazy. My body, and I remember reading things that autistic individuals have written about. They're understanding something. This happened to me a lot. They understand something, like someone asks you to do something, or you want to do something, and you give your body an order to do that thing, and your body says, yeah, right. And that's putting it mildly. So you can't, I guess the biggest message that people should understand is you cannot reason with your senses. You cannot reason with them. You cannot control them. Sometimes you will need to do things like, I felt for months like I had a 50-pound weight pushing me left. So if I was standing, I would feel like someone was pushing me over. And the only thing that would calm that would be rocking. So I would stand there and rock. And I'm standing in the kitchen rocking and laughing. I must have looked like a raving lunatic. But I was laughing because I'm thinking, all these years of working with autistic kids, And I know that the people doing an ABA would be saying things like, that's inappropriate behavior and they shouldn't be doing it, and they try and stop them. And I'm thinking, well, that's totally cruel. And I understand why they have PTSD if they go through a situation like that, because they're taking away the one thing that regulates the system. And that's a horrible thing to do, which is why stimming is a good thing. And you should let somebody do it if they need to do it.
If you're looking at someone through the window and they're moving all around their house,
Yeah.
they look crazy, theoretically.
Yeah.
There's a party inside. There's music. There's something. There's so much that you are not privy to. You have no idea what is happening. And that person that you're looking at, and you've determined that they're being weird or they're being crazy, has every logical reason to be doing exactly what they're doing, exactly the way they're doing it.
For sure. And also, like, if a kid's having and refuses to go someplace like the mall, like the performance, like the whatever it may be, and they say no when you make them do it, and then they have a meltdown, you can't be angry. That's not a behavior problem. It's survival. You feel like you're under attack. You feel like you're gonna die. You know, things are so difficult. I remember one day I thought I was doing better. It was before I think I had my new filters. Yes, I think it was still before. And one of my children had a special event at his school. Now, I would avoid going to all these things because I knew I was going to get in trouble. But it was in an amphi, and I said, okay, it's outside. And it was a really important event at school. And, you know, needed his mommy there. And he was a little kid. He was in first grade. I said, all right, I'm going to handle this, right? So I walk into the performance. I said, okay, I'm better off not being near the speaker. I'm going to go up high on the amphi, and I'll sit there, and it's going to be okay. So I'm sitting up high, and I didn't think. I had my cane, fortunately, with me, because when things go nutty, my body starts to freak out and not work properly. What I didn't take into account that if it was going to be flashing lights and too much and loudspeakers with bad quality, that even though I wanted to, I was going to have to get the heck out of there. So I'm up there on the top, and it gets very crowded there, and there's no way for me to get out of there. And it was night, and they did the light show, and they did the music, and it was really bad quality. So my whole body was freaking out. So I said, okay, I'm just going to close my eyes and sit here. I'm going to get through this, right? So like by the time it was over, the place cleared out, and I had to have somebody help me walk down the stairs to get out. And I walk out the building, and I said, okay, I live 2 blocks away. No big deal, 2 blocks away, right? And I start walking, and my legs, my leg just froze. I couldn't make my legs move, even though my brain is saying, oh, it's all, go home and get some tea. And my body is saying, And I had to the only thing that propelled me forward was to start bouncing my leg 2 times and then moving in a kind of unusual way. And it was and with my cane, and I'm walking down the street, and I'm bouncing my leg, and I'm stopping, and I'm doing all this thing. I said, well, you know what? This is so insane. I'm just going to sing. So I started singing, right? So I'm walking down the street singing and bouncing my leg and stopping. This little kid, I feel suddenly his eyes on me or come up behind me. And I could see he was scared. I must have looked like a total mad woman, doing all these weird things and then with the cane and walking really, really slow. And I said to him, it's okay, you don't have to be scared. And he scuttles by me really fast and says, feel better, feel better. I thought I just escaped from an asylum. I felt really bad for him. But that's the kind of stuff that your body can just revolt.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do. If I wanted to get home, I had to do those things. Otherwise, I would be stuck.
The concept of
underestimate it.
Sensory meltdown, when you haven't experienced it, is very difficult.
I don't understand it.
It's not. Would you say it's impossible to grasp?
Oh yeah. So I'm 13 years out of surgery, and this cooking in the kitchen, right? And I'm thinking I have 5 minutes left to be in the kitchen, and then I'm done. And my kid's standing there with the music, and he's in his mood of. And I was thinking, okay, it's no big deal. I'm reasoning with my brain. 5 minutes, you'll be done, and it'll be fine, and it's only music, and so logic says nothing. And 2 minutes later, my body goes into freak out, and I start shaking, and I have to go and lock myself in a dark room for 2 hours and just not talk to anybody, and drink tea, and otherwise I can't walk, talk, or do anything. That's something people don't understand because it doesn't make sense. It's not a logical thing, but sensory overload is not logical. and certainly shouldn't be punished for, right? Because it's not a behavioral thing in any way. And if you see a person in a sensory overload, the parent, you need to learn to observe. And if you see a person in sensory overload, then you need to give them a quiet room and don't talk to them and don't reason with them until their adrenaline calms down, because they're not going to compute anything anyway, and they have no control.
We're in such a rush all the time as parents that the don't talk to me for 10 minutes or an hour, it's so difficult for parents to just leave their kids alone. And I say this as a person with autism, who as a child with autism, I still struggle with just leaving her alone in her own silence.
Yeah.
But I just need you to let me do things my own way right now.
Stop the noise.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about ADHD assessments or sensory assessments that most people with ADHD just haven't had. Why isn't that? First of all, what is it? And secondly, why isn't it standard?
Standard, the medical industry has no interest in making things standard, because if you have, let's say, Irlen syndrome, and your visual field is not stable, and oftentimes it's also with auditory processing disorder. So your brain is processing those two senses differently. And what you're going to have is a person who looks like they can't pay attention, right? So you go to the neurologist, and the neurologist gives you a MOXO or whatever that test is. Or asks you, if you pay attention, ask the teacher if the kid's paying attention. Let's say an example, if it's in your auditory processing, the parent will think there's something going on with the kid. The kid's not picking up, understanding what's said on a noisy background, let's say, or they're mispronouncing words, or, the parent senses something kind of funny there, or complaining about things being loud, or making things very loud all the time, or speaking very loud all the time. So that sounds like an auditory processing disorder, but they'll take the kid for a hearing test, and the hearing test is going to come out in normal range, because there's a very big difference between hearing beeps and functional auditory processing, okay? And there's a special test for functional auditory processing, as is CAPD is a central auditory processing disorder, and you have to ask for that particular test, which can only be done for a child that's old enough to distinguish if something's being said in two different ears or on a noisy background, and understand those instructions. So let's say the kid's sitting in class and they have an undetected auditory processing disorder because the hearing test came back in normal range. So the parents say, okay, there must be something else going on. And this kid's listening to the teacher, and somebody's tapping with their pen and shuffling their feet, and it's windy outside, and someone's slamming doors, and kids are whispering, and the child loses the keyword in the sentence, or the sentence entirely. And it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and so they're pretty awake. They lose a keyword, and they say, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to think about it for a second. Intelligent, I use inference. So they start, I can't, let me think, wait, I'll figure it out. So they zone out for a second to figure out what's being said, and then they get the word, right? And they zone back in, but the teacher's already said 5 more sentences. So now they missed 5 more sentences in addition to the word. Now, 15 minutes of that, the kid has no clue what's going on, and they start daydreaming or annoying somebody or whatever they're going to do. So can the child pay attention? No. Now, then they go to the neurologist, and the neurologist says, kid can't pay attention. The neurologist says, child, can you pay attention to class? No, I don't know what happened. I'm sitting there. It's only the end of the period. I didn't do anything. I don't know where the period went. That's an actual conversation I had, right? And so the child, the neurologist says, well, then give them Ritalin. Big problem. What do they need Ritalin for? The child's sitting. The child's not knowing anybody. Well, it can't focus. You're not fair to your child. You're not helping your child perform in class. My child didn't need Ritalin. My child needs to have an auditory processing test. And even without the test, I figured it out. I needed to take, you can get an FM system, or you can do something very easy in the beginning to see if the child has a problem like that. And you can take a cell phone, like Apple has an iPhone, has a feature called Live Listen. And that will pick up, you could speak into the phone, and then on the Bluetooth earphone, or there's the AirPod, it will say exactly what the person is saying into the phone. So I would put the Live Listen feature on the telephone with the Live Listen feature activated on the teacher's desk and the Bluetooth earphone. And suddenly the kid's focusing in class. because the problem was auditory. It had nothing to do with ADHD, but that kid's going to get misdiagnosed with ADHD. Now, oftentimes, same thing happens in the visual field. Let's say if they have Irlen. I had 2 kids misdiagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia because Irlen syndrome, which is inefficient processing of white light, can cause visual disturbances or symptoms that look just like dyslexia. And so my kids couldn't read even though I had years of remedial instruction. And then they did really badly in school, and they didn't know what to do with them in school because either they're intelligent, and if they're given an oral exam, they would do really well. But if they had to read and write, suddenly they would get between 30 and 50 points less on a test, which of course you get a kid and it was failing when they should be getting hundreds. They don't want to learn, they don't want to go to school. So that happens with Irlen syndrome. So all these things are misdiagnosed because nobody checked sensory, and it's a crime. And unfortunately, because they're neurological, they are not mechanical issues. They are not measurable. An eye doctor will not pick it up, and an ear doctor will look. They'll look and they say the mechanics look fine. There's nothing wrong, but there is something wrong. It's just not easily measurable. So for here in Israel, the Ministry of Education doesn't recognize these things, and you talk to them about that, they're not even interested. They weren't even interested in all the schools that my kids, once they got Irlen filters and they got something to help them with auditory, like I said, with a cell phone or FM device or whatever it's severe, you can use a specially programmed hearing aid called a low gain hearing aid to sort out the auditory issues. Once they got those things that they need so they can function and get normal sensory input, suddenly my kids are performing really well in school. And all this could be avoided if people would just test for those things early, and then they wouldn't have misdiagnosed, and they wouldn't have failure, and they wouldn't have social rejection, and they wouldn't have all of these other things. A teacher often thinks if a child is not performing when they see they're cognitively intelligent, that they're being lazy and they're not trying hard enough, and then they start disrespecting the kid. These kids are working so much harder than anybody else, but people don't recognize it because they don't know what the problem is. And the parents are trying their hardest to help the child. They send them to remedial instruction. They take them to a neurologist. They do all the right things. They get an assessment. The assessment says all the things they can't do, but it doesn't give them any clue what they should do. I've been down all those roads for years. And they're simple problems that can be alleviated if just tested properly at the right age, and all that can be avoided. I think that we can attribute the changes to the Irlen spectral filters and the assistant device, that their sensory issues are not treatable with Ritalin. I mean, it's insane. That's the case.
This is exactly what I mean when I say that the system is broken. We talk about a broken system all the time, not because the people that are in it are bad, but because the system isn't designed to look for things it doesn't know how to look for, or doesn't know that it's supposed to look for.
They don't have the time either. If you're going to sit in when a neurologist, if the first intake they're with you for a half hour, that's incredible. Usually it's more like 5 or 10 minutes.
Right. Behind a computer,
they come out with a diagnosis.
Not even looking at you.
Yeah, when they come out and they diagnose you, you need to really understand diagnosis. You need to observe that person for a long time. And the system doesn't have that. And actually, the person doing a didactic assessment also can't do it because they're looking to use standard tools in a clinical setting, which is not a normal, real setting. The child is not going to behave regularly. Sometimes kids are nonverbal. They have abilities, but they're not. I mean, my son that keeps walking in and out of here is very, very practically nonverbal. And they can decide the person has no intelligence because they're untestable, which has no representation of who they are in any way, shape, or form. Which is very sad, but it's a reality we deal with, right?
The people who pay the price are our listeners right now, right? The determination of your son is that he doesn't have intelligence because he's untestable. That the only thing that shows is that the system that is attempting to test his intelligence is unintelligent.
He got that when he was in school, and actually I had him in the States for 2 years in the school, and they do it every 3 months. They had to do like this testament, and I remember I saw the scores. They need scores, they need numbers, and I get this test back, and I had a 0 on it. I'm like, excuse me. It's like, what does that reflect? I see an intelligent human being here. He's doing lots of things. He happens to be nonverbal, and he said it's very severe auditory process problem. He didn't understand what the heck he wanted. But for us, that I on my website, there's a new section called Organizing Minds, Professor Shlomo Chaim, and he talks a lot about assessments and things and incredible stuff, right? Very dear friend of mine. I invite you all to check that out on my website because there's a lot to learn about that. And he very much challenges the system. He's a
We love
specialist
that.
in it.
We love that here. So we will drop all of those links, of course, in our show notes for y'all. If somebody listening right now suspects that sensory processing might be part of the picture, 'cause I knew that that something weird was going on with my sensory perception. And that's just something I know about myself. But it wasn't until I spoke with you that first of all, I was able to identify Irlen as well as auditory processing disorder, because there were some things that I described to you that immediately you were like, oh yeah, all of those things are connected. So I said, I've always had kind of aura or like this glowing around light.
Very early.
When I drive at
Very
night, I'm always like pulled towards the
sounds like
lights that are
Irlen.
coming in my direction. It makes it very difficult to
Sure.
see at night. It like after I had kids, it got a little bit worse. And you immediately said, Irlen, like go test.
It screams Irlen. Yes, get it checked.
Yeah, get it checked. But where do I even start?
Irlen, you go to irlen.com and you fill out a questionnaire and you see if you answer yes to a bunch of stuff, and you should get an Irlen assessment. It's very simple. And I think any kid that's reading slowly or has headaches or you suspect has visual perceptual issues, like one of my kids was 5, he was in occupational therapy and he hated doing puzzles. He didn't want to put puzzles together. And he also, like if you said, pick up the blue crayon bits at a box of broken crayons and find the blue one. And he had a very hard time finding that because this visual discrimination was off. And then when he started reading, he was jumping all over the place. And those were all Irlen things. But the thing to understand about that, unlike what you said, most people who have Irlen have no idea that what they're seeing is different from what the rest of the people are seeing. They don't know that the words are not supposed to move around on the page or have rivers running through them, or they don't know that they're not supposed to see halos at night, or that they wonder why they can't see in the night, decipher where going down a staircase where the end of the stair is and where the next one is, or all kinds of things, or why the ball, they're playing on the soccer game and they see the ball and suddenly they can't see the ball and then it hits into the head, or they kick it in one direction thinking it's where the gate is, and the gate?
The goal.
The goal, where the goal is, and they kick it. And by the way, it's the same. It's the
same word in Hebrew.
I just translate it very nice. It happens to me sometimes. Languages collide. At least they're not stuttering out, and that happens too. I get a traffic jam. So he goes to kick it in the goal, and he thinks he's kicking it in the goal, but the goal's like far away from where he thought it was the goalpost. That happened with one of my children in the Irlen assessment. She said to touch this spot on the paper that he was supposed to be reading, and he touched the other side of the table. And that was, I said, touch it. And he said, I am. The whole image of what was going on in that paper had sort of moved across to the other side of the desk. And he had no idea that he was not touching it. And these are crazy things. And you wonder why a kid then can't function in class or do a math problem, because the lines, I see in his head he's doing math, really well, and then on the paper he's failing because the lines are just moving all over the place, and he has no idea. But he thinks everybody sees things like that. Nobody in a didactic assessment or like will say to you, "What do you see on the paper?"
Right.
What does it look like? No one ever asked that question. I was with all my kids, and they were assessed from the time they were young. I don't know how many assessments I've been to. Who asked that question? That's the first question they ask you when they put something in front of you in the EOSIS. What do you see on the paper? What color is it? Is the color changing? Are things moving? And only in those assessments, one of my kids was in 5th grade when I took them, and one was in 11th grade. Mm-hmm. That was the age they realized they didn't see things like everybody else.
It was when I started driving, honestly, and I didn't know, I didn't put it together until our conversation, but I was thinking, how are there not more car accidents at night? You can't see. So I don't
Yeah.
understand how everyone's driving around and you can't see. I guess we just need to like know the roads. So I figured out different things. Like when I'm driving, I will stick very far to the right. My driving teacher
Right.
hated it.
I did that too.
And I'm
I
like,
did that too.
well, I
Right?
might be coming into ongoing traffic otherwise. So this is how we're going to correct for
Right.
this. I'm going to stick more to the right so that I make sure that I'm not doing anything dangerous. The sidewalk is safe. Whereas the
Right.
lights coming in the opposite direction, I can't
Absolutely.
gauge where they
I
are.
had problem with night vision long before I knew I had Irlen. And my problem with Irlen was very severe after my surgery. But I did have problem with night vision and depth perception at night beforehand. And for the few years before my surgery, I really didn't like driving at night. And I would always say, I'd drive in the right lane and look sort of to the left out of the corner of my eye and keep my eyes to the right. That was the only way I could drive.
It's the only way, which seems,
I wouldn't go on a highway or anything at that point. Just couldn't.
but it's
And by the
all
way,
just-
hormones affect these things, so they do change. So let's say if you get an Irlen lens, one color when kids are small or something and they go through puberty, likely their color will change. All of my kids' colors changed. My color's been stable since I got my glasses, but most of my kids have had various colors. Hormones affect it.
interesting.
Mhm.
It's also,
Oh,
it's very, very interesting because what you're describing is the assessments are being done by people who don't have the experience. If you don't have the experience, then the way that you're assessing is by definition limited to the amount that you understand. And that
They do that according to
comes by
diagnostic
your
criteria. And
experience.
that has nothing to do with what reality is. They're not going to sit there like an anthropologist and observe human behavior for a long time and tell you, well, I think this is going on. One of the things I always did with my kids, and that's why, getting back to the beginning of our interview, was I was relieved, was that's what I would do. I would watch them all day long, every day, and then try and figure what's ticking them, what's not working properly, what can we adjust to try and make the environment more palatable, how can I get through to them. But it was always by observing them. That's the only way we can figure out what's going on. And
Everything that we
parents
know
also,
about developmental psychology, everything Piaget and on, is
yeah,
simply human observation. He only had 12 kids. And yet all of our
Yeah.
developmental psychology knowledge
Yeah.
base is built on Piaget and his 12 kids
yeah,
because of that power of observation.
yeah. Professor Ruben Feuerstein also had worth looking into. He had theory of mediation, that we learn through mediation, a human who mediates the environment to their child, not AI and not all this other stuff.
It always has
It's
to be a
already
human.
there to mediate. There must be a human
Must be.
who can filter what we're not filtering.
Let's talk about systems for a second, because you're one of the top 50 global neurodiversity evangelists, and you've been in this space for decades.
Yeah.
If you had to pick one of the most frustrating things that you're still seeing that the system gets wrong, what is it?
I can't pick one,
I know.
but
Is it possible?
I can go through the list. The two systems that are severely damaging to our kids in every way, shape, or form. The first is the educational system.
Mhm.
Oh, that is a nightmare, even for non-neurodivergent kids and for neurodivergent kids. They got it all wrong. I know how I would overhaul it. I don't even think we have time to get into all this, but educational system is not meant for children.
No, it's not.
It's meant to make robots and compliant kids and not having anything to do with developing their potential other than teaching them to read or write if they, but other than that, the rest of it is taking everything away from them. And there are plenty of people that speak that way. And the other system that severely damages kids is a medical system. Those two categories, the DSM, diagnose, categorize everybody and everything into pathologies. ADHD, I mean, that is a diagnosis that infuriates me.
Because it's ridiculous.
It's attention deficiency, deficit. Excuse me. I know lots of ADHD people. Like I said, some of my family's diagnosed with it. I call it something else completely. I call it divided attention. And if you divide attention, if you learn how to manage that, then you're not given that old computer that can only do one thing at a time. You're given the best iPhone that can handle 50 different things simultaneously. And if you learn to manage that, then your abilities are far superior than the average folks. So you're not deficient, and you're not, that you pay attention to everything going on. When you're younger and you haven't developed those skills, you're going to get lost. But if you do develop the skills, and sometimes it requires using assistive technology to help you achieve what you need to do, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's why it exists, right? But if you develop those skills and streamline yourself, you're a significant advantage. And there are professions that you will do much better than everybody else, because you can make connections that the average folks don't make, or you will observe things and behavior that other people won't observe. So you might be much more sensitive to others. You can be the best of the best with your deficiency disorder. It's not, it's a strength. You just have to learn how to use it properly. And you need to be patient. And the people working, they need to be patient to teach you those skills. But that's just one example of what the diagnostic and medical and educational systems pathologize everything. My kid can't sit in class. Well, they're an athlete, they're a dancer, they're paying attention to everything, and they're bored out of their wits. Bet you can't sit. There's a boring thing going on. There's this, they want you to puke back, excuse my lovely English, puke back the sentence that the teacher said in the exact same way the teacher said it onto a page, and that's the right answer. But what does that help you in life? It is nothing. It is irrelevant. You want the creative answers. You want the person that will contribute something in the world. And if you make them into robots, which I know the powers that be are interested in making us into compliant robots, but if you make them into the robots, then they're not going to contribute anything to the world. I'm sorry, I'm very renegade, right?
No, I love that. I mean, this is basically what we talk about all the time, because when you're looking at a system, you need to understand who built the system, what is keeping us within the system, and who it serves.
The system is now has not changed since it was built to put people in factories.
Right. That's what it's for.
It's just become technological, so that it's doing the same things using a computer that they did without using the computer, but it's not changed. And you also have to, make sure that the medical industry is making a lot of money on it. It's big pharma. If everything's pathologized, then everything needs to be medicated. And when your kid is diagnosed with ADHD, they need to be getting medicated for life, because it's never going to get better. That's what they tell you.
I think actually that's one of the reasons that I'm so skeptical of the medical community. Both of my parents are physicians, very intelligent, excellent diagnosticians, working as physicians for a long time, highly specialized. I know them. I'm just as smart as they are. So it means that the smartest doctors I know are just as smart as me, which means that they're just people who have access to specific information that allows them to make an informed decision within their field of knowledge and expertise.
Sure.
With the amount
they're diagnosing in a lot of ways
they have
things that they're determined by the last 2 years of medical school, teaching them to what drug can I prescribe to treat this, or what fits in the DSM, depending on what kind of doctor you are.
DSM-4. Now we're on the DSM-5, but so everything you knew before, it doesn't apply anymore. You need to learn the new,
especially regarding autism. I mean, my goodness, look what's happened in that in the last number of years.
Well, all we know is to avoid Tylenol, because apparently it causes autism.
Tylenol. They won't say anything about childhood immunizations, which have quadrupled the number that the kids are getting in the last number of years, and that any immunization can change the way your brain functions and affect your brain functioning, and any neurological change can affect the way your whole body functions. And if I was a kid, with my neurological changes that happen, I wouldn't be surprised if someone diagnosed me autistic, because I have all these sensory things, even though I'm not autistic. Anything can affect the way your brain, a medication can affect the way your brain is processing. So people could make misdiagnoses autism all the time, as far as I'm concerned. Or they can have real functional changes. And it's just some people are born genetically different, and that's one facet of autism. But I'm sure that there are all different kinds of things that could cause autistic-like symptoms as well that are out there. Many people who are diagnosed or have some sort of mild form of epilepsy will also display autistic symptoms, even though, and what's the root of it? There's no one root for something that's an umbrella term that's just getting widened all the time. So it's very difficult all this stuff is very complicated.
It's because we don't leave enough space for not knowing.
Right.
So last question. I ask this of all of my guests. What do you want the squirrels, the people who are listening right now, to actually do with what they've heard today?
So a number of different things. One, realize you can't argue with the senses. And it's important to determine that when something's sensory and when something's behavior issue and not punish or fight and try and respect what's going on with somebody who has a sensory issue, trying to get to the root of the sensory issue and help find solutions to improve the quality of life. So that is very, very important. People are not being difficult. They're living in a different reality. That's one thing. The other thing, again, if a child is reading slowly or seems any kind of something going on, possibly in the visual field, first thing to do before you go for review instruction, didactic assessments, and neurologists is to check for Irlen syndrome. That is really super important because it could avoid years of suffering. And I can say that because my youngest child, when I started timing in first grade, said he's starting to read a little slow. I took him right to get a Irlen assessment, and he had it too. It's often genetic, by the way. And he did not have to suffer like his siblings did in school, and he did not develop the educational and social gaps. Trust yourself as a parent that you know your kid better than anyone else, and certainly better than the professionals, and you can advocate and should advocate for your children and the things you believe in and not give in to the system. And that's a big one. You definitely, if all the professionals say, go out of the treatment room now and we'll call you at the end of the session because we know and you don't know, you should be in those treatments and learning from those professionals because you are with the kid almost all the time. And what you can take from them, you take from them. And what if you say do something funky, then you know not to work with that professional. Those are certain things that I want people to take with them. And neurodistinct brains are a wonderful thing. They can be challenging, but they're a wonderful thing. And don't let anyone tell you different. And if your kids are different, then you do not see them as a deficient and deficit in the ADHD. Rather, look for the wonderful things that they have. Because as a believer in faith, every soul comes down to this earth for a reason. And they have a mission, they have a job to do. And appreciating those differences and helping a child to appreciate those differences, that everyone has a job, something to contribute to the world. Those are things that I want people to understand.
That's beautiful.
Not see the child as a diagnosis before the child, or the other way around. And not necessarily the diagnosis is important, just seeing what's going on for them and figure out how to make it easier for them.
Thank you so much. Jacki, this conversation is one that I have genuinely been wanting to have on the show for a long time. And you were such a powerful guest to deliver this message. Before I let you go, where can people find you? The book, your blog, your work, where do they go?
The easiest place to go is my website. It's jackiedry.com, JACKIEDRY.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just look for my name, Jacki Edry again. I have no E on my name. It's JACKI.
We're going to drop all those links for you as well.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn easily, and you can find me through my website easily. Please do come. And my book is available on Amazon, and you can find a link to my book on my website as well. And you can, message me. I'm very happy to link up with people from around the world, and happy to answer questions, quick consultations if people want, no costs and things like that as well. I also speak. I'm happy to do speaking, teaching about all sensory processing and all this sort of stuff.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jacki. Of course, as always, descriptions and links in the show notes. And squirrels, if anything in this conversation made something click for you, just sit with that for a second. Not because something is wrong with you, because something may have been missed by the system, by the diagnostic process, by the professionals who were doing their best with what they knew. But you are not failing, and you were not broken and are not broken. You were working harder than anybody realized with a brain that is struggling to process information in a way that nobody thought to check. And that is not a character flaw. That is a systems failure. And systems failures have solutions. You're not broken. The system is. Let's build a better one. Bye, squirrels. We'll see you next time. Thank you.